So where will we produce the food in the future?
Well, I think you said urban or normal, sort of
Urban or rural?
urban or rural,
Is
and
there
I think
such a thing?
it's not one or the other. I think it's probably both. I mean, traditionally we have been farming in the rural areas, and I think this new initiatives that you are talking about, it's extremely interesting, and particularly given the fact to what Sverker talked about freshness and products that are more able to with longer shelf life. It gives immense opportunities for both parties, I think.
Okay, so what will we produce in the rural areas?
Well, I think we will produce both stuff that you were talking about, but also the traditional stuff. When I can look at my own farm, but I also have the fortunate position to meet a lot of other farmers, and the innovation that's going on out in the rural areas is really immense, and it's not only it's mainly because of the consumers and the restaurants and the general interest in healthy lifestyles and good food, nutrition food. That drives innovation among the farmers. I think we've also had a market for many years now where we've been sort of talking too much about the regulatory issues, about we having the same rules as other countries in the EU. We're trying to sort of harmonize those rules in some ways so that we're not sort of restricted by legislation and policies, but the innovation power within the farmers can really be explored. And I love the fact that Sverker is talking about getting closer to the farmers, because we take away a lot of in-between players that's taking the value out of the food, really not adding any value. That is so very hopeful times, I think.
It is. So let me stick with you for a while here then. So what are you growing at your farm these days?
We grow the traditional stuff: wheat, barley, sugar beet, grass. We've grown peas until Findus closed their operation. And then a few years ago, I started an apple orchard as well.
Apple orchards. Would you grow the same, given that Sverker has this fantastic infrastructure that enables you to ship stuff directly, virtually to the consumer?
Yep.
Would you grow the same things?
When?
In the future, when Sverker's infrastructure conquers the world?
No, I don't think so. Or I think I will grow additional things. I mean, you have the natures of law means that you can't grow the same stuff on the same land all the time. So you have to change your crops. But we have a list at home with things that we think we will do in the future, and that doesn't necessarily mean we will use all the number of hundreds of hectares of land that we currently use, but it could mean doing similar stuff that you do in store, but we do in one of our barns, of doing maybe herbs, etc. That takes much less space. But still, we have a lot of arable land that is good and well taken care of, and of course we need to find the produce to produce there for the future as well.
So you guys are going to not be so separated. Going to use Claire's products in your barns going forward.
Why not?
So Claire, where do you see that your scope starts and ends? Is it going more towards the home or more towards what's called perimeter farming?
Well, we never really wanted to put ourselves as this is often a question that you get. What about the local farmers? What you're taking away kind of their way of life? And we actually see that urban farming as a whole, not just in farm, but it's a complementary system, because as you were saying, there's nature. You can't always farm tomatoes, especially in climates such as here or in Germany. There's a limit to what is possible, and so urban farming, it just kind of complements what is already there. We always like to think that urban farming is also kind of refocusing everything to a very, very regional level. There's certain things that our farmers in Brandenburg can, grow that just taste outstanding and also don't travel very far. So there's no reason for us to try and compete with them, because the potatoes from Brandenburg are just the best that we can get. But at the end of the day, I still want tomatoes every single day if I want to put them in my salad, and that's something that my farmer from Brandenburg just can't deliver. So that's where we feel urban farming comes into play quite nicely, because we can kind of recreate the physical environments that nature can't do, and then to kind of satisfy our very voracious globalized appetite that we have all grown very, very accustomed to. So it depends from region to region. This interplay between regional and urban will probably be very different. Some will be able to provide more, especially in warmer climates like Spain. Some will be able to provide less. So this is kind of where we feel also our data approach and just figuring out what does the city need and what does it want, and then kind of personalizing our approach to that city and to the very specific, let's say, constellation that is,
Okay.
that
But
is there.
one other question here is, so you're going, when I take a look at your growing cabinets, I see stuff that you add layers of value because you can see the stuff in the shop or in the restaurant. And how do you compare it to these mega modern farms, the Aero farms of this world?
The plant factories.
Yeah, the farm factories.
Yeah. Well, we kind of think that the modular approach has taken it that one step further. I think the plant factories, it was a very good and a very significant step towards the right direction. But there are a lot of very different, let's say, points for improvement within our food system that we feel they aren't able to address, one of which is transparency, because I'm not sure if you've seen Aero Farms or just any of their products, a lot of them, they are still cut herbs or cut salads. They're on they're bagged just like every other kind of product that you had. It's just that they were farmed a lot closer to home, which is good. So we think it's just we're kind of just version 2.0 of the plant factories. Just the fact that you're doing it right directly in the heart of the city, not in the perimeter like a lot of the plant factories are, and also the transparency value that's added to it. You know exactly where it's coming from, what's gone into it.
So many small farmers. That's the modern right.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, this is what we mean when we say giving ownership of food back to the people. Right now, the way that we're doing it is it's in retailers. But essentially, at the end of the day, our systems are very easy to service. They're very easy to use, especially with a much more sophisticated farming platform in the future. It'll be virtually, or it should be possible for anybody to farm. And our dream is not just to go through the retailers, but also just to go to communities. So if, a group of people who have a shared home, say we have a lot of space downstairs, we're going to put the farms inside. We're producing far more output than we need for ourselves. We're going to go deliver it to the school next door or to the cafe next door because they need some salads. For us, that's actually a much, much better or a much nicer approach.
Okay, so you will grow a lot of farmers out there. So work, essentially, right? So a lot of new jobs and a lot of new farmers. That's good news, right? Because you're from the Farmers Association. So most of your members will actually live in the city in the future. Is that so?
I think we will have it. We already have a fair share of, if you look at this organization, we have a lot of our members who live in the cities. They've inherited land. We also look after or have members who own a lot of forest, and many of them live in the cities. And of course, this is a challenge that we have. That it's like this corridor here. Here's people living in the cities, and here are the people living rurally, and the split up here is getting wider and wider. Many children who now live in the cities, they have no grandmother who lived out in a small cottage out in some small village. They don't have the relation to the rural land.
But here's the chance to bring the rural and urban back in line again, right?
Yeah, I think the interest in food in general and the interest in nutritional health, well-being, sporty way of living, that brings it back, but in another way. And that's the challenge for us to make sure we connect people here again. Like your initiative, but also other initiatives where people in the cities actually sort of have their own little plot of land, maybe not managed by themselves, but managed by a farmer. They can come out and pick their own carrots, pick their own apples, etc. There will be a lot of different initiatives, I think.
And a lot of different farmers. Some will be computer scientists, but they will define themselves as farmers, I guess, because that's cooler.
I think any farmer who wants to be part of the next generation farmer will be extremely data driven. I was just recently in a big fair in Germany where all the big machinery, etc. Normally it's been just tractors, but now there were at least 2 halls where it was just about computer and data mining. How we make sure that we don't treat one huge sort of 100 hectares in the same way, but that every sort of piece of, or maybe not every square meter, but in that direction, that we give them different nutrition based on what they need. I mean, we have so many, if I look 20 years back when my father ran the farm or when I do now, we are using data in a much greater way, and it's just sort of the beginning.
Okay, the modern Swedish farmers moving into cities. So we have a question from the audience.
Yes, my name is Christopher from the startup IQ Chef. You were actually talking just about the question I was supposed to ask, how you see the data coming into farming and the colleagues, but maybe you can extend that a little bit more. How do you use it today? How do you see yourself data driven today, and how can you see it in the future? Maybe using like predictive intelligence to know about what the consumers really need and want. If you look into the future, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how you use it today.
Well, I'll leave the consumer part out of this just for a second, but looking at how we use the data today, a good example is, you know, all what we grow needs some form of fertilizer. And previously, if you used organic fertilizers or what we call chemically based fertilizers, or whatever you say, that you have just put it all out, like in 100 kilos of nitrogen in one go. But now we have a sensor on top of the tractor that looks down on the plant. Depending on the color of the leaves, it sends a signal back and gives less or more. And because, you know, farmers have often been sort of accused for just throwing out nitrogen as much as possible, because but there's an economy. No one would do that because it costs a lot of money. So you just want to give exactly what the plant needs. That we've been using now for the last 3-4 years. We've also changed the way we give fertilizer to the plant by not spreading it out like with throwing it out, but now we drop it down just where the plants are, so it doesn't go further on out onto next to the roads, etc. It's typical use of data. And if you look forward then a few years, not too many years, I think. A lot of the data, and in my apple orchard, for example, I have measurements in the ground that I see exactly how much water there is. That gives a signal back into the watering system to give just enough amount of water on my Ingrid Marie trees, but not so much on my Elise trees. So that is also something. Then that will go. Now it's a decision on the guy who looks after my orchard, who tells us, okay, let's program it in this way. The next level is, of course, that he will not do that. The plant will give a signal up to the computer. The computer will decide himself how much water that will give him. So, you know, the rest is just fantasy. But there will be a lot of artificial intelligence, I think, into farming.
Clarice, last question for you then before we close this panel. Will the artificial intelligence and all the data that you have, will that be able to use in order to support traditional farmers?
So as part of our kind of transparency, as I said before, it's one of our key values, and I think it touches base actually really on the question as well. I think there's a lot of different silos of data that are currently very disconnected, which is why you have these inefficiencies in our supply chain. In an ideal world, the retailer would share just as much data with the farmer as the farmer would share the other way, so that at the end of the day, the service that the consumer is getting is so optimized to your very professional or your very individual needs that there is no waste and there are no inefficiencies. So what we're trying to do a little bit, because we control so much of the supply chain just because we're producing and then producing on site and selling right to the customer, who then sells to the consumer, we actually do want to just also, share that data with anybody. So eventually what we want to do is that our central farming platform is even accessible to consumers. You can check which farm is in your region or in your neighborhood. You can see what varieties are growing there. You can see how much water was used throughout the week, how much fertilizer was put in. If there's a variety change, who your grower is, for example, if you want to ask questions. This, again, as just part of a kind of reconnecting us with our food and really understanding what goes into it and how much effort actually is required to produce the things that we are consuming. So we're not going to be protective with the data that we collect. We actually think that there's a much bigger value when you share it. So
data is not the new oil; it's a new soil. In a sense.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's beautifully put.
Thank you very much.